of the Overview Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Gill, Chairman of the committee. Chair of the committee, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. We're being streamed on YouTube live, and I'm hoping lots of people watching remotely. I welcome everybody here in committee room run, officers, members, and any members of the public. Before we start our meeting, can we all make sure we've switched off our mobile phones? And we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the critical fire.
Thank you.
Apologies for absence. I've heard from councillors Idris, Issa and Thaxton this evening.
Councillor Bennett is late.
And Councillor Bennett for ladies, who will be with us. Does any member have any interest to declare on 22? No, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Can I sign them as a correct record?
I make one remark before
Is this a matter of rising or so for us to do in a minute?
it's a matter arising.
Okie dokie, I'll sign the minutes when you carry on.
The minutes contain a considerable number of actions, some of which have been done, but I think it would be useful to have clarification for the committee from the officers as to how we propose to manage matters arising from these minutes. Because otherwise we limit matters of substance and agreement by people who come to the committee. We don't follow up as to whether they've been carried out or not. So two examples I'd like to quote. So whether these have been done or not, I don't know. Question, page 11, Chief Community Safety Officer to provide briefing note, update, and joining up happening antisocial behaviour and crest. Question, the second one is on page 12, these are just by way of example, 10.2, Director of Finance Management to report back on the percentage of council bottom line that is covered by central government subsidy or direct group money. I'm not aware that either of those have been done or not done, but we haven't got a reporting mechanism for that.
So I've provided an action tracker for this meeting. This is something that I'll as part of the minutes as previously done, so that will form part of the agenda in future. And I believe the second action was completed. I sent a note round on the 12th of July.
They're not on here, I think, is Will's point.
They are. I've checked them, and the first one is
on this
pending
list.
action. Yeah, they're all on that.
We're excellent. I mean, if this now covers the job, I mean, it's been answered at the same time as I'm asking.
Excellent. We can move on. The Borough Commander's report. Unfortunately, the Borough Commander has sent her apologies. We can't be with us today, but instead we have excellent subs in the form of Superintendent Colin Rinaldi and she's in. Thank you. I have to peer at your so thank you very much. I've asked the superintendent to give us a 5-minute intro because we've all got a copy of the report that is provided, and I know my colleagues have got lots of questions, but I think it'd be really helpful if you gave us 5 minutes introduction. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. So, as we said, Superintendent Owen Ronaldo, I'm the lead for Layford Police and Kensington Chelsea.
it is a real privilege to be here. I'm a huge believer in scrutiny and oversight, and how we hold each other to account as public servants is really important that we do these kind of meetings. What I want to do is elaborate a little bit more really on the report around the new Met for London, what that actually means in reality, and what it means for the borough itself. So when I started end of March here. When I started, somebody said to me that Kensington Chelsea is the shop window for London. And it's incredibly important that we get it right, and policing is a huge part of that. And since I've been here, it's really resonated with me, that comment, and it's really true. We've got to get it absolutely right. Part of that is the new Met for London. So the Commissioner launched the new Met for London just about 2 months ago now. What that is about resetting our relationship with London. I think it's fair to say that in my 17 years of policing, I think we're in the most challenging period that I've ever experienced in terms of policing. And I think not just in London, but nationally, we're at a seminal moment now for policing. And it's really important that we get it right. What's underpinning the plan really is three things. So that is more trust, less crime, and high standards. It's absolutely right, that's the focus, because we have to win back trust, which has been hugely undermined by some of the horrific, horrible things that have gone on with our document. What the plan really sets out, and what is really key to it, is about how we're going to do it. And since I've started here, speaking to partners, community members, local residents, is about, a plan is great, but what are you actually going to do? What is it going to look and feel like for me as a resident, as a business, as a visitor? What is that going to look like for me? So within that, there is community crime fighting. If I'm completely candid, as the neighbourhood policing superintendent, that lifts me up when I read it, because we have rightly focused on neighbourhood policing. One of the reasons that I'm here in this role is because neighbourhood policing is such a key area. The work that our teams do in this borough are, in my opinion, specialist roles. They engage in a different way, and they can make or break how communities feel about policing. And my experience as I've been here is that they're hugely passionate about making a difference, but there are real challenges in terms of their time and the support that we give them as a senior leadership team. So, in terms of neighbourhood policing, what that's going to look like in the next 12 months. So there is now going to be an uplift to neighbourhood policing, that is confirmed. So we are going to have an uplift on this borough of neighbourhood policing officers. And one of the concerns that was raised was that as a BCU, so as a 3-borough BCU, Kensington Chelsea is fundamentally a safe place, and that the report does reflect that. But that's not to say there aren't challenges with crime and disorder and social behaviour. But I think traditionally we would potentially have been third in that list of 3 boroughs to get resources or support or assets. Our BCU commander has decided that that will not be the case, and actually our uplift in resourcing has been split evenly across the 3 boroughs, which I think is real progress for us. And it's a recognition, like I said, of the key role that Kensington Chelsea plays, not just in London, but internationally as well. So within that, there has been uplift in PCSOs. We have an increase in ward sergeants and a ward inspector as well. So we're getting increased supervision, which links into the case in report, which very clearly said that we need increased supervision and we need increased scrutiny of what officers are doing day to day. So it's a real positive. Second part is around culture change. So some of the justifiable criticism of the Met is around culture and behaviour that has become in certain circles endemic. I will say that the majority of officers are hard-working and doing the right thing, but it is quite clear there are officers and staff who should not be part of our organisation and should not wear the uniform. And I can confidently say tonight that Elise and myself are as passionate as anybody about making sure these people are found and they no longer work for us and they're no longer a part of the community of London and what we're trying to do. So that's really key, and I think the Commissioner's been very clear about some of the expected numbers that will be coming through in the next 12 months. It's talk of up to 60 officers a month potentially facing gross misconduct and such things. Again, for us as the leaders in the Met, that's a good thing. We don't want people in the organisation who don't uphold the values that we hold personally ourselves. The third part is around fixing our foundations. So one of the things that came out really clearly in the Casey report, and I spoke to Baroness Casey during that review, one of the things that came out really clearly was that we need to set our officers and staff up to succeed. And I think, quite rightly, resourcing has not necessarily quite rightly has been identified, that resourcing has not necessarily gone to where it's needed the most, i.e. to neighbourhood teams, to emergency response teams, and to those officers that are having the greatest number of interactions with Londoners and potentially making the biggest difference in communities. That's now being reset, so we've got that investment in neighbourhood policing. We're looking at a better data-led approach to bring us forward in how we do things. We need access to accurate, relevant data that allows us to understand what is the crime mapping, and what does it look like in their communities, and can we start to predict that a bit better? And that feeds into antisocial behaviour as well, how we record it and how we actually pull that data and what we do with it. It's a really clear plan. It's really focused on neighbourhood policing, which again, like I said, is really positive from our point of view. We are seeing some good results. I've listed them in there. I don't propose to use this as a forum to sing my own praises or sing our own praises as an organisation. I don't feel that's what we're here for tonight. But I would say that we're already seeing the benefits. That's not to say there isn't huge challenges ahead, but like I said, we are absolutely motivated to make a difference. We realise there's an issue and we will make it better. But we work really closely with some of the partners in the local authority and across other sectors, but there's a huge amount of work to do. I'm really looking forward to some questions tonight and challenge.
Well, thank you very much for that very clear introduction, which I think addressed lots of things that we're interested in. But now I'm going to open you up to that volley of questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask all my colleagues to make really succinct questions tonight? Because I know we've all got lots of questions. So the more succinct we answer, the more succinct your answers, the more we'll get done. Great, I saw you first.
Thank you, Chair and Superintendent. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Chief Inspector, thanks for tonight, and also for supporting our antisocial behaviour conference,
Definitely, yes.
which has informed my questions and thinking, because that's residents telling us collectively what they think, as indeed they tell us as ward councillors. And also thank you for the 17th of August event, explaining the door stop here in more details apart from the acoustics in the room. It is a very useful and valuable experience. I welcome everything you've said tonight, and particularly the uplift. But what assurances can you give us that uplift will generate visible policing on the streets, which is where our residents want to see them? Because if police are seen out on the streets and owning the streets, it deters crime, deters antisocial behaviour. It's the broken window syndrome from New York. You deal with the small things, the big things, that deal with big things happen.
Yeah, so since I've started, visibility has been pretty much the number one, and it was raised in that meeting that I was called as well. It was around visibility. So it's incredibly challenging visibility. So with a small ward team, to be visible and for people to see them out and back is sometimes quite challenging. In terms of how the uplift will develop that, so with an increase in the number of sergeants, that should allow, we will have basically no sergeant will have more than 2 wards responsibility, whereas now some have 3 or even 4. That will go down to 2. What that will do is allow sergeants to have greater focus on some problem solving that needs to take place, which will in turn feed down to the officers to allow them to have more time out and less time in the stations, reviewing reports or having to work on some of those issues. So if I can reassure you, my teams want to be out as much as possible, and they want to be there. The uplift in PCSO numbers, I think, is really critical as well. Our PCSOs play a hugely critical role in our communities. A different level of engagement and different skill set, I think, to some of our officers. They are experts in engagement, and they do some really good work. So that will be coming. And as a priority, across the Met, it's being treated as a priority to push those officers into those positions, to get them in there. So it will come through. The other thing I would say is that one of the things that we're very keen on is it's not just visibility that's critical, it's presence. And it's not just being visible, it's being present. And are we speaking to people, are we challenging people that are not adhering to what the community wants, but are we engaging with people, are we present? Walking up and down sometimes isn't enough. We need to do more than that. And I want our teams to be out and be present and be effective. And I think that's when people start to feel more visibility, and that interaction is really key.
I wish you luck with it.
Thank you.
Lucy, I'm going to go round like this. Lucy.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for this report. I wanted to talk about the section of the appendix supplement provided on right place, right person. That's me.
Yes, right here, right person. Yeah.
At the end of October now.
Yes.
And I think many would welcome this if it is done in the right way and the system is prepared for it. As, of course, if people are in a mental health crisis, they should be being seen by the right professional. However, there's obviously lots of worries, I think by many, that we're not prepared for this. And I firstly just wanted to understand a bit more about the training that we're giving the first responders who will be making judgments on when a call needs a police intervention or not, who officiated this methodology and consulted the training model. As I appreciate your training handlers, however, we don't have any evidence or case studies that have been that sort of existed of this being rolled out before. So it's difficult to understand and know how we can have faith in this new model and ensure that lives are not being put at risk as a result of the change in the service and response. And then also just ask whether, on top of this, will there be sort of a review process in place either every 3 or 6 months? And do you plan to track cases which have not been dealt with appropriately so we can ensure that call staff can learn from the mistakes that are made?
What's worth adding, isn't it, Lucy, that we went to a public meeting the other day on the potential closure of the Gordon Hospital. And of course this came up because that, that's fewer acute beds, more problems potentially in the community. So.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that isn't necessarily said within this whole movement is the main reason why there's been this shift is because police time is being taken up by spending it in A&E, but the difficulty is there's a lack of inpatient beds, and it's confusing to understand how in the space of from May the letter being issued to now the end of October, which has been pushed, but how we can change a whole system to ensure that people aren't going to lose their lives and this is still going to be addressed in the right way and local authorities aren't going to be overwhelmed.
Yes, okay, so there's a lot in there. So some of it I think is probably better answered by NHS colleagues about what their plans are and what they've got in place. However, to address some of the points that were there, so it has been implemented in the country before, in Northumbria, it's kind of in place now.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't a new concept that London is introducing on its own. So this is something that's been introduced before and has been reviewed and is established as practice that has been done before. If that hopefully provides some reassurance, and there's documentation online about that Northumbria trial and what took place there. In terms of, you mentioned a couple of times about people losing their lives potentially and how we can prevent that. So one thing just to reassure around how right care, right person would work is we are not saying that if there is a person in crisis where there is a threat to whether that's NHS staff or other partners, the police don't attend. But we have to prioritise that if somebody is unwell, then they should see medical staff over police officers. And there have been times over the years where police officers have been at the front of trying to support and help people in crisis. And that has caused injury to that person, or they weren't expecting a police officer to turn up. So immediately there's issues caused by that. And this is a recognition really that actually, if we're to look after vulnerable people, then it should be medical staff in the front and centre of doing that. And that's really key. But the main thing is for me is we're not stepping away from if there is a risk to the public or a risk to the responders going, that means that we would not be going, we would absolutely still be going.
Yeah.
In terms of how those calls are assessed, so all our call handlers are trained. There is essentially it's going to be a central vulnerability hub that will review these calls. So these are staff, there'll be NHS staff working in there as well. So it's about a much more joined up approach and a joined up assessment about how we assess calls that come in. In terms of how we track cases, so I'm not privy to what that would look like, if I'm totally honest. I don't know what the review plan would look like. However, I would be very, very surprised if there wasn't a tracking and review process in place. One of the things that I think as a service we're very good at is reflecting, debriefing and trying to learn from our mistakes. We are very good at that. If there is, worst case scenario, if there's a loss of life, then that would go to a review, that would go to a review. But beneath that, there would be lots of occasions where potentially, if something was to happen, then we would have to review that. Until it's in place, it's very difficult to say what that would look like.
And can I ask one quick
We have a
review?
very small supplementary.
Is there a sort of vision that, or I don't know if this is the plan, there's going to be an alternate number that, with a comms plan, it's going to be funded that actually people are directed in a different way than calling 999 when they're in crisis, or I guess I can understand that calls are going to be moved
Yeah.
across and directed to healthcare professionals, but it's not known really what that line's going to be, that if someone is in crisis and it's not broadcasted about this is where you should be going. So for the MCAS or the single point of access, I just feel like there needs to be, I'm unaware of what that kind of looks like.
So I think our message really is around if anybody's in doubt, there's still dial 999 and let informed people make a decision. And there is 111, isn't there, for NHS advice that's not an emergency. But, if people feel like they need urgent help, then 999 is the right number for that. And then, or 101 even, and then together we can make that decision.
Thank you. I'm going around, I'll come back to you, Tom. Sydney, have you got a question?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Superintendent, Chief Inspector. Also welcome your input at all of the fora that you helped and joined us on. I've got two very quick questions. One of them is on psychological profiling that goes on with police, and the second one is on the statistics in relation to theft from the person. The third supplementary question will be on stop and search. So if we go through those in order, page 71 of the supplementary document, which is page 53 of your document, just talks about increased psychological screening from 2,000 to 6,000 of your officers. I was just concerned as to whether that is a substantially high proportion of your officers that are actually on the beat and actually working. And so that's page 71, page 53, second bullet down. If you could tell us a bit about that psychological screening, because my residents are rightfully concerned that the police officers that are actually working and policing by consent have the right psychological makeup to make sure they can do the job, defray issues before they arise, and are actually sympathetic when they're carrying out stop and search.
So on the question of psychological screening, so that is more around an officer well-being side in recognition of the accumulative trauma. And unfortunately, I've supported staff that have had an accumulation of trauma in doing their job. So it's about recognising that impact on officers and part of the wellbeing package. That feeds into our recruitment and retention as well. And it's quite well documented that staff that feel well looked after and are well looked after are more likely to stay in the organisation. And I think that comes out of cases as well. It's about people need to feel looked after, and we are looking after our staff. Because ultimately sickness is a real challenge. Sick staff or staff that can't go out and do their roles, whilst we can find roles for them, it can be quite challenging at times. In terms of pre-screening for high-risk roles, so that is in terms of a high-risk role potentially would be child abuse teams, or it could be firearms roles. So it's about screening officers to make sure they're the right people to do those roles.
And then the second question is on page 12 of your supplementary document, third through down, theft from the person. If I'm reading these statistics correctly, we're the 8th highest in London, and your positive outcome rate, well, it looks like it's 0.2%. I just want to get some understanding of, firstly, why is it so high, and what are we doing to prevent this sort of theft from the person happening within the borough, because it's clearly a problem.
Yeah.
And secondly, what are we doing to tackle the fact that the positive outcome seems, according to some people, quite low at 0.2%?
Yes, it's a really good question. What I would say is, if you look across the whole of the Met, it is a challenge across the whole of the Met. It's not unique to Kensington and Chelsea. So the Met overall positive outcome rate is 0.8%, which is low. The challenge that we have here is a high volume of footfall in some of the areas on the borough. And we also have a challenge that where there is a report made, that can often be that a person has been here, and realise when they got home or at a later time that something's gone from their bag, and the assumption is that it's a theft, and the last place they can remember it is going to be shopping or visiting somewhere or being on the borough. And it's exactly the same challenge as if you look at Westminster. Westminster is a huge challenge, and it's a replication really of what we have here in terms of high footfall and people remembering the last place they saw their phone or wallet or whatever it was in that area. So it's a real challenge. In terms of what we are trying to do, so we've got meetings, we work with the Knightsbridge bid at the moment around some of the crime levels, and we hold weekly meetings with our partners at the council around warden deployments, so our warden deployments alongside our officer deployments to make sure that we are marrying those two up together. It is incredibly difficult. It links into the earlier point around visibility and proactivity. One of the things that we are reviewing and working on is around hotspot locations, and can we work with particular shops around what's taken. 41% of the deaf person is mobile phones. That's really difficult, really challenging, because to actually prevent that, whilst there are organised gangs that are potentially involved, finding them and doing that work is incredibly difficult because it's such a transient, difficult crime to pinpoint. So often there'll be huge CCTV windows to try and review potentially for essentially what is a low value theft in reality. One of the things that the Limit Fund really makes clear is that the cumulative effect needs to be taken into account. So whilst these are high volume, potentially low impact offences, there's no violence involved, they're hugely impacting on the individual at times. And it gives that feeling not feeling safe in London, or not being a place to want to live or visit. So we have to realise the cumulative effect of these things, that these take place in these calls. So there is work ongoing. We are working with businesses to try and make it harder and to support their own staff in how they look out and protect their customers. So a lot of our hotspots will be in shopping areas. So we really need to look, that's what we're looking at, is how we can do that prevention piece.
And then the final question, if I may, on stop and search, just in relation to thefts. Obviously, there are some wardens around the Sloane Square area, High Street Chemicals, got a lot of footfall traffic.
Yeah.
So we'd expect to see far more uniformed police officers on those areas, because a lot of the thefts we're seeing are from on the street rather than in the bin or in the shop. But in terms of stop and search, is that something that you're going to specifically target, that your officers are going to be doing more on, to actually try and take down some of these organised crimes or people doing these, what you're calling lower value thefts, but when our residents are getting something stolen from them, of course there's a massive impact on them. They report it to you, and then either there's no follow-up within 28 days or nothing happens. And so it's a huge pervasive problem that probably needs to be looked at seriously in relation to stop and search.
Yeah, so I've often said that what we're aiming for is for the borough to feel like a hostile place if you want to commit crime. When you are on the King's Road, you feel that presence of police, and that is something we're really aiming for. Whether we could say that we would increase stop and search in a certain area, I think that's a very careful balance to get. I think we put more resources in. They've got the powers of stop and search, but stop and search won't be the panacea to preventing this. Again, it links into engagement and good communications, looking at prolific offenders. So the Knightsbridge being a part of our CBO panel now. That is to help sort of share data between us, share information to better target people who are involved in some of these offences. So I think it's a real balance. I think we have to be very careful about mandating and saying we're going to flood an area and stop and search, because there's a community trauma attached to that as well. We have to be really mindful of. So I think it's about exploring all our policing powers and all our opportunities, rather than saying in particular stop and search would solve this issue. I think it's part of the solution, but I don't think it's the whole thing.
Thank you, Jeff.
Claire.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. I have 3 quick ones, if time allows.
Good.
So let's try.
Let's look at brevity.
Yes. So my first one actually is following on from Councillor Young's in terms of mobile phones. If the mobile phone is stolen, you can take the IMEI number, and some phones, if they're iPhones, perhaps even all Samsung, have tracked their phone. And yet we do keep hearing cases from people who had their phone stolen, provided the details, and it was not able to be recovered. So what is happening to all these IMEI numbers that make that phone be able to be used again, that we can't use that information?
So with regards to that one, so tracking of phones is quite a challenging scenario. So if officers track a mobile phone, for example, so firstly a lot of the perpetrators will know that there's tracking technology and avoid that. If there is an opportunity to track a phone, often it will give potentially a block, and narrowing that down with sufficient detail is very difficult. And legally, it's unless you've got a specific indication that phone is in that premises, that's very difficult to then progress with. So it's quite a legally challenging thing to do. In terms of IMEI, so as part of the crime report, IMEI numbers are listed on the crime report, and it's on a database. So if a person is arrested with a mobile phone, the IMEI number is searched on the database to identify stolen phones. There's also proactive work that takes place around where phones are sold to. So where there is, and that's very much a sort of community-led and neighbourhood approach, is where we have premises that are believed to be taking mobile phones that are stolen. Then we have conducted warrants previously, not on this borough, but we have conducted warrants previously on those premises.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And the second one, very quickly, is looking at the values, which is on page 3940 of the plan and page 58 of the bundle, as it were. And I was wondering, in terms of values, how what exactly are we doing to embed these in terms of individual officers locally? Because of course that speaks very strongly to restoring trust, I think. I think this also speaks a little bit to the question of psychological screening and profiling. Are we doing any screening for or encouragement for these sorts of values? How are we? Culture change is a very difficult thing, of course.
Absolutely, yes.
So how are we doing that?
Absolutely, as you said, culture change is hugely difficult and takes time as well. So in terms of how we embed these values, so there's some parts of it really. It's around making sure that anything we do takes into account what these values are. And part of the challenge, I think, for us as leaders is to make these relevant and real for the officers and staff that are going about their work. And I think you're absolutely right that they can be words on a page, but what do they actually mean in reality? Part of the key to that is supervision. So I've already talked about neighbourhood policing supervision, but actually it's about better training our supervisors, and that was something else that came out in various cases report, is around the training for supervisors and do we equip them for the role they undertake. We've said it many times that the sergeant role, which is the one above PC, is absolutely critical. They have the largest number of interactions with officers, they are closest to officers on the ground, and they set the tone, I think, more than anybody else around what the expectations are. And one of the areas that the Commission has invested in is training for those officers. So every sergeant receives 5 days of training per year now, which is mandatory. And that is very much focused on introducing the fund and the values, but actually what the behaviours that we need to encourage and challenge as well. So it is introduced, but it's at that critical level, which is sergeant level, you make it a reality for the PCs, the PCSOs and other members of staff who are all part of the organisation.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, just very quickly, in terms of the emphasis on neighbourhood policing, what learning do we have from the hub in Notting Dale at Worthy Studios, and what can we do to protect, preserve and build on that?
In terms of having a location out in the community. So this is absolutely part of the plan. I've already had conversations around our estates strategy and what that will look like. What we are now exploring, and I think what I don't want to do is criticise decisions that were made in times of austerity, because they were made for reasons to protect staff numbers. And I don't think it would be fair for me to criticise decisions made around the state previously. But where we are now is that at times our officers are quite far away from their wards. That links into efficiency and effectiveness. I think what we've also discussed is around, there's always the added I think there's always an added part of neighbourhood policing is when officers travel through their ward to their base, you start to get a feel for the ward when you're not in uniform. And if you're in uniform walking around, you disrupt the environment. But actually, when you're not in uniform, when you're commuting, you get more feel for what is going on, which is really important as part of that holistic knowledge of your ward. So we are working. We've already started conversations with partners around availability of buildings. There's a longer-term central plan to basically ensure that, in particular, neighbourhood teams are located closer to their wards. And that includes accessibility of officers in terms of potential front counter. That's all conversations that are taking place. So it's definitely recognised.
Thank you. Tom, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Two questions for me. I'll ask them quickly. First one's on technology. And we've talked about tracking phones, and you mentioned some of the difficulties, but the report does really emphasise the importance of using technology. So I wonder, how is the force changing in terms of bringing in skills, dedicated roles, departments, because it's not really IT, it's looking at the opportunities of technology. So how is the force changing to incorporate that? That's my first question. And then the second one is on vehicle crime. So I know there's 0.5% positive outcome rate, and vehicle crime is the thing that my residents raise with me most often. What are the plans to improve that positive outcome rate?
Okay, so with regards to the first point around technology, so we've invested in a new system called Connect, which essentially is a new platform for us to record information on crimes, it links into custody, whereas previously we had multiple systems that were completely candidly were out of date and didn't communicate with each other, and it meant officers were double keying a lot of the time. What Connect has done is it's brought everything together. It's a huge investment, and it's about ensuring that officers are spending less time inputting data to free up other time to problem solve where they need to be.
So sorry to interrupt.
That's all right.
I suppose the direction as we're pushing in is, are you hiring people with backgrounds in technology and creative technology people to see, what could be out there in terms of new opportunities for using technology to solve crime?
So that question I don't know the answer for. Essentially, we are recruiting in that way. That's not something that we've necessarily borough specific, so it wouldn't be on a borough basis, but it would be done centrally.
Yeah.
I would suggest that, given the fact that data and technology is part of the plan, that would be taking place. I know now we've got a chief scientific officer that we never had before, which is about scrutinising data and best practice from evidence-based policing.
Okay.
I think that does feed into the use of technology.
Yeah.
So I can't give you a firm answer, but I'd be surprised if that vehicle crime. So vehicle crime links in with I think that theft person concern. So whether it's high value vehicle theft or theft from a motor vehicle, they're both very, very difficult when you have people who are visiting or don't live in the area and are victims of crime. That's really difficult. With residents, I think the message can get out and there can be that communication. Where we have challenges with crime prevention for people who are visiting. It links in visibility, it links in that feeling of being a hostile place. If you are out committing theft of motor vehicles, we want you to come across a police officer who's going to stop and search you, let me speak to you, or make you feel like you're not welcome, or we need to go after the offenders who are doing that. There is an element to it of organised crime as well, in terms of high value vehicle theft, and the low detection rates in terms of vehicle crime are indicative that it is a wider problem and incredibly challenging, and it's organised. There is central work. One of the key parts that we're doing now is around recognising that central specialisms, so in terms of specialist crime, organised crime networks, and how we address those, that needs to be far more focused at a borough level, and that's something that is coming now in terms of our localised tasking process. So there's a recognition that actually there's a part to play for specialist assets in local policing that includes vehicle crime and the organised crime nature of vehicle theft. But if I can, the good news story was this week there's a theft of a very high value vehicle on the borough. The first people to report were at DWO, it was nearby, out and about, and that vehicle was recovered within 2 hours, wasn't it? Within 2 hours. And back to the owner. So, you know, when I've got the officers in the right place, we can respond effectively, but I don't disagree with the outcome of that.
Thank you. Will, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, both of you, for joining. And I welcome the reference to the Robert Hill in both your report and to paraphrase
Some principles, all citizens are police. The police
are paid to be full-time
holders of law and community.
safety. And that leads very much into the local ward level. Recently, two things came out. One is that the old first with machete attack some months ago was solved eventually by police, but we're working with local residents in Greenford and business CCTV
as well. And I think that's an interesting area.
The other thing is that our local police sergeant said in his view there's no solution to the epidemic of theft in Kingsway without multi-agency working on drug locking people up, stopping people arrested, there's not a solution. Because they have drug dependency and still. The question is, could you tell us more on top of what's in the paper, how this local intend to enable the local community to be resilient, increase resilience to crime and antisocial behaviour, not to have the police separately do it for them. And could you tell us more about the build community direction act to address causes and prevention and helping prevention?
So, on the first point, in terms of enabling the local community, so this is part of the uplift in sergeant numbers, is about actually having local leadership available and in the right forum. I'm pleased that the local police sergeants felt able to be honest, and that's a key part of everything we're trying to do, isn't it? Is being honest with everybody and saying, well, actually, it is a challenge and we haven't got time. So that's part of it, is enabling that local leadership and experience and decision making. So that being in those forums and speaking with community members and being on them is really critical for that. I agree. We are in a way a bit of a unique time because we have so much footage available, ring doorbell footage, dashcam footage. There's so much available. We have done this creative platforms where people can submit footage online, so that's far easier, which links back into technology and how we use technology and make it easier for people to report and submit evidence. And also our investigators are far more alive to that kind of footage being available. What we do offer more locally is designing out crime officers who can help local areas, housing associations, residents associations around how to make their own premises and environment as safe as possible. We do that with the community safety team. It's all part of that holistic overall support we would give community. In terms of addressing the causes and prevention, that really links into how we are working with our partners, different agencies, that's the NHS, community safety team here at the council, and with yourselves as the sort of local representatives of your residents, and that feedback. So one of the things we do is around those criminal behaviour orders, so looking for CBOs when we can, because they can mandate certain things. So they can also mandate drug rehabilitation, linking in. Where there's an acquisitive crime committed and the person is arrested, they are drug tested in custody. That then opens up access and it becomes a requirement to speak with the drugs worker. So there are triggers that are in place that bring in support services to those individuals. But I do think there is an element of it's got to be a bit of a community-wide approach to how we deal with it. Arresting people doesn't necessarily prevent them from committing crime the next day. When it's low value, but high impact, doesn't prevent it from happening the next day. You need to start the root cause, and that's where that drug work, the drug intervention is key.
It strikes me as a multi-agency thing. Maybe there are some, perhaps as a question, when some of these lessons have been learned, are there ways in which we can communicate better between ourselves and council,
Residents and all those sorts of things.
can help each other in that?
Yeah,
Sure, Mr. Priestley as well.
he's probably
Well, that's also-
chomping at the bit to answer. One of the things I would say is that we are, and I think Stuart would agree, we've got an excellent working relationship and are very joined up. Is there always room for improvement? I think there always is, and there always will be. I don't think we'll ever be perfect. But I can really assure you we're always working to make it in the best place.
Some resident associations are much better attuned to this.
I have a final question for you, and that's about accessibility. Do you know how hard it feels as a resident to report a crime? Have you ever tried it yourself? So my experience is that if something happens that isn't 999 worthy, and so my bike is stolen or something like that, and I go online to report it, it's an incredibly frustrating experience. It makes the police feel very distant from you. It's very unfriendly and very sort of trammelled. And also, there's no feedback loop built into it often, or you don't get the right sort of feedback from it. So I think mine is, rather than a question, an observation that I'd really like you to take away. And I know this is not a borough issue, it's a Met-wide, but when you're feeding into the Met-wide thing, what I would suggest is that you need to co-design it with users really, to get people's feel for what it feels like to get on the computer. Because I'd always rather report it by computer because I think it's more efficient. I don't want to waste time, calling you and taking up somebody's time. And I know all the details, I can just bung them in. But if you feel as if it's not designed for you to use and you're not going to ever get any feedback, it's a really unpleasant experience as a user. So I'm feeling that.
I will definitely take that away.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to draw this to a close because you've submitted to an awful lot of questions, but that's because we all really care about what we do and are very appreciative of it. I think just to sum up a few of the points that have come out, I mean, Lucy's point about right care, right person and our concerns, yes, it's been piloted, but tracking, the emphasis of tracking how it goes now you're implementing it and reviewing it and learning from what goes on is really important. Had that theft from the vehicle and the person, the low detection rates are a cause of concern. You've given us some very good reasons and understandable reasons why it's difficult, but it's obviously a priority. When people see low detection rates, kind of thinking that police therefore to detect stuff, and so it undermines confidence. We talked about the importance of embedding those very good values, and hopefully we'll see the signs of those in the coming years that those really have gotten better. But they are important to us. We think they're good values, and we like to see them embedded. Also talked about the importance of location, which you've taken on board, and just that it aids visibility and it aids getting to know the area, and then also talking about access to your services. But that was a very quick summary. But thank you very much for being here, really answering our questions very comprehensively.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're moving on in a sort of seamless theme to Stuart. And the strategic needs assessment update on serious violence duty.
I shall be brief on my introduction, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Because this report to you today to brief you on the statutory serious violence duty, the responsibilities of the council, and the progress towards delivering those duties. So the serious violence duty was introduced under the Police Crime Sentencing Court Act last year. And at the end of January this year, we were notified, the council was notified, and its partners, we have 12 months to prepare the necessary processes to be compliant with the serious violence duty. So we have until 31st of January in order to comply. And on page 17 of your pack, 1.2 describes the key requirements of the duty holder authorities, of which we are one. And those are to undertake an analysis, to produce a strategic needs assessment. We have the draft strategic needs assessment in your pack, and then to develop and implement a strategy, a serious violence strategy. The guidance which came from the Home Office is quite broad around the processes to manage this, and also the definition of the strategy, and the definition of serious violence. And in conjunction with the Mayor's Office and the London Heads of Community Safety, they've developed across London a standard definition of what serious violence was, what we would consider serious violence, and that's included at 3.3. I won't read that out for you necessarily. But that provides a kind of the London definition. That was to ensure that there are 32 definitions of serious violence across the capital. So there's a uniform approach across the capital. Similarly, there was no clear definition as to the which partnership within the local authority area would have the necessary responsibility for overseeing this work. Most local authorities have chosen to have their community safety partnership, as was recommended and adopted within RBKC. Safer KC partnership is the statutory community safety partnership, which is overseeing this work. The council and its partners have already got 3 plans which are specific to this area. So we've already been undertaking, and as this committee will be aware, already been taking on a significant amount of work to counter violence within our communities. And our commitments are contained within the Youth Violence and Exploitation Strategy, the Violence Against Women and Girls Strategy, and the Community Safety Plan, which is the statutory overarching plan. So, and those plans and strategies are still live at this point. So it was with this in mind that the Safer K&C board agreed that we didn't necessarily need to draft from scratch our own standalone serious violence strategy. There was already 2 specific strategies covering this area, but instead what we will undertake is an iterative process of engagement with stakeholders and residents. And we would develop an additional chapter to the community safety plan to function as the serious violence strategy. And that's the process which we follow. The bulk of the report is the draft serious, the draft strategic needs assessment, which forms the evidence base for the strategy. So we're putting in a draft for any comment, and then from this draft is also going, I should say, to Safeguarding Adults Board, Safeguarding Children's Partnership, Health and Wellbeing Partnership, and the Statutory Community Safety Partnership for their comment. Once that, as that is finalised, we will be developing the serious violence strategy, which again, I think I said by having a share and a draft of that strategy, which will go through various iterations of engagement and will come to leadership in January. I think that's enough on the process, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Perfect. Tom, I know you had a question.
Yes. So there's a lot of good demographic analysis here, particularly of the victims. But what I want to know is, do you feel you're getting into the sort of root causes of what's causing these crimes, and in particular violent crimes? Have you had the chance to speak to offenders and build up a picture of what's the root cause, and therefore what were potential intervention points, I suppose? where that type of crime could have been prevented in the borough through
Can I add to that question?
Yeah.
So that was roughly the question I was going to ask. There's a lot in here about victims and not about perpetrators, and surely part of the need is to stop the perpetrators or in there before they start becoming perpetrators. But maybe I've misunderstood it, but I'm glad Tom asked the same question.
If I could add to that too, instead of making a separate question, the question I asked the police officers in the last session involved you, police sergeant, saying that the visible crime in King's Road was not the issue. The issue was to drug dependency, and unless the work that was done on drug dependency was sorted out, we would always have people trying to get money through crime. So the issue there is not the crime, it's the root cause.
That's really unfair. One question, three questions.
But it's the same
I know you are.
It's the same thing.
So I work backwards.
Yeah.
So in regards drugs, drugs are driver for violence, so is alcohol as well. Also in the context of young people, so the serious violence that we're talking about with young people, we have a relatively small groups of young people who are living violent, offending lifestyles. And part of our work, which I think speaks to Councillor Bennett's point, is that part of our work is to try and intervene early, to understand what are the characteristics which might place a young person at increased risk of being drawn into a violent offending lifestyle. And there's academia about that, but we also have our local intelligence about that. And then seeking to identify those young people who may be drawn into living offending lifestyles, whether it's violence or whether it's other types of crimes, and then intervening early. We do that in partnership between community safety services, the family services, the youth offending services, but also in partnership with the voluntary and community sectors. I'm working in schools and education settings. I'm working with the DCS at every point possible so that we can understand, we can identify young people who may be drawn into that offending lifestyle. The reasons why the vulnerabilities of why someone, the antecedents of why someone may be drawn into a violent offending lifestyle are complex, they're individual, they involve things like adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and that's not to say that there's cause and effect. In that, if someone's traumatised, they will go on to live a criminal lifestyle or violent offending lifestyle. But there are certain characteristics which increase the risk of young people being drawn into those offending lifestyles. And I think that speaks to the drugs bit and slightly to the young people's side. To the adult side, to the adults who may be drawn into domestic abuse offending, who may be domestic abuse offenders. The academia would say to us that what we've learned from academia is that there's trauma often in the background of the lifestyles of perpetrators of violence. It's not to excuse endless violence, but to try to understand it. They may have experienced or witnessed trauma, violence as a child. They have normalised that. They may have both poor coping skills, like a number of reasons for which they are involved in those behaviours. I think it's okay to be violent to their partners or to be violent to their children within those familial situations. And part of our work is to try and, on the adult side, particularly the domestic abuse, to try and identify those perpetrators who might benefit from perpetrator programs. And we do provide perpetrator programs which work on a one-to-one basis to try and support those men who are offending. It's predominantly men who are committing violence within the home to assist from doing it. And sometimes men who are violent in the home are also violent outside of the home as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lucy.
Might derive slightly from what you've just been saying, but just on the section which talks about health and well-being, 1 in 10 children are estimated to have a mental health condition. 1,960, aged 5 to 19 in RBTC, which is higher than the national average. I was just wondering what in schools in terms of early prevention and support for both perpetrators and victims, whether as a council we're doing anything in order sort of to help identify people who might need support, either to have been a victim to such violence or maybe are showing signs that they could.
I mean, taking the JSNA is where we would be describing that, but I'm sure Stuart will happily answer that.
Yeah, so we would, both children's services and community safety services would work very, and the police would work very closely with schools. And schools are increasingly more sophisticated at being able to identify young people who may be at risk, or may be exhibiting signs that they can traumatise themselves, and then through their pastoral and support services to be able to intervene. So I think one of the characteristics, I suppose, of being a victim of violence that we see, which is particularly prevalent within children, is and very pernicious, is the internalisation of shame and guilt and responsibility, which means that they are sometimes, they don't want to come forward and disclose, and that can take many years for them to disclose. And their way in which it plays out is in other behaviours rather than disclosures. And I think that our schools and our children's services have been more sophisticated now, being able to spot some of those signs in young adults in ways that perhaps we haven't been in the past around adverse childhood trauma and the impacts that has on children. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. Interesting.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Stuart. It's a very good analysis, particularly data-driven analysis. And clearly the strategy is the key document that what are we going to do about it. Recognising this is about serious violence, amidst all the data, very occasionally the public voice appears in here. Perhaps it could be emphasised that people have a view on that. And that doesn't come out very much, but where it does come out, it does appear that the broken window syndrome we talked about with the police officers earlier is something the public recognise, and because that's not broken windows and ASB are not serious violence, but people, I mean, would you recognise that that's something the public are very interested in, and if you address those, you'll also have an effect further on the chain?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there's more for us to do around that, actually. There certainly is more for us to do about publicising violence is not acceptable, and that there are services to support people who might report violence, even if they're not themselves may be reporting violence. And I think there's certainly more for us to do about promoting what the offer is for victims and survivors of violence, so that we can make sure that we are intervening earlier, which I think speaks to the earlier point, as early as we possibly can. And that's particularly the case within it comes across all violence, but there's a lot of academic research around domestic abuse and victims of domestic abuse being the victims of crimes 20 or 30 times before they will come forward to an organisation, form an organisation seeking support. So the more that we can do to promote that these are crimes, you will be believed, something will happen, and that thing will happen will keep you safe, and that there are services. The more we can do on that, better.
Any other questions on the JSNA?
The serious violence duty. Yes, I do have one or two just very quickly. First of all, I wanted to clarify from you, speaking about victims and offenders, on page 23, in the executive summary. Point number 4, we're referring to children and young people affected by violent offending. And I just want to clarify, is that affected by being a victim or offender or both?
So this is point 4.
On page 22 of the pack, your
The
executive summary.
executive summary.
Yes. Says children and young people affected by violence have complex and multiple.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm a bit deaf.
Sorry, is that referring to victims or offenders or both?
That is both.
Yeah,
That is
okay.
both.
That's,
And I think it's a really good question because in the context of young people who may be affected by violent offending, sometimes the victim and offender point is blurred because of the pressures around young people. And what we're trying to do in the right intervention services is where there is a victim, is to intervene with that victim and wider group to make sure they don't become perpetrators because of that link to victims and perpetrators. So when we talk about young people affected by violent offending, the victim perpetrator labels become less useful because I think
With young
people.
thank you, because I just wanted to comment where you're looking at theme 2, the risk and protective factors. That seems to be a very comprehensive analysis of what those factors are, which of course will lead to potentially lots of good things in the strategy in terms of prevention but also responding. Finally, I just wanted to ask very quickly, the serious violence duty requires to have a strategy and implement a strategy. And I understand from the report that the reason for including it as a sort of part of the existing community safety plan rather than a standalone document is that you already have 3 relevant strategies which are still current. And I'm wondering how those are going to be incorporated into what we learned from this needs assessment.
It's a really good question. So the needs assessment will inform. So sort of my reflection is that what we learned from the needs assessment is similar to the analysis that we've undertaken. So the data here accords with the data which informed the violence strategy and the youth violence and exploitation strategy. It's added to it, it's updated it, but there isn't a radical departure from the data picture to that we previously understood. It's updated it, which has been useful, and it is that we will need to capture in the strategy. What we need to ensure, and I think this is the point that you're getting at, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, is that there is a coherence between what this data is telling us, what will be in our new strategy, and what we're already delivering in the existing strategies and plans. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that there's a golden thread that runs through the serious violence strategy, accounts for the analysis within the needs assessment, and is kind of coherent with the other strategies. And that's the jigsaw puzzle that we've got to put together when we're putting together the strategy. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you very much.
I suppose, just to summarise really our conversation, I think we welcome seeing it at this early stage, and we very much look forward to seeing the strategy at an early stage as well. Thank you very much. I think there's a slight concern that there's not enough about the causes and the perpetrators in this needs assessment, because they are part of the need, or they create the problems. So addressing how to stop them early on or divert them is one of the needs of tackling serious violence. So I think that's our fundamental observation and thought to give you from reviewing. Thank you very much for coming and answering such a wide selection So now we move on to our financial monitoring report. Welcome, Johnny. Everybody, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, Johnny, Andrew and Lisa is going to give us a quick intro. Hello.
Well, we probably don't need much. The headline figures obviously show that there's a forecast overspending in the first quarter. That is driven by primarily the increase in housing needs costs, temporary accommodation of homelessness, which is across London. They're very acute here, and that's a concern, I think. They're also driven in part by the industrial action taken by various contractors that work at the council. That's regrettable, but that action has now concluded, and so I'm optimistic that the position in relation to that will improve as we move through the financial year. And it nevertheless shows an overspend during this quarter. There are also some smaller overspends. So I think the picture is probably more discouraging than this stage last year, but we have in previous years shown an overspend in the first quarter and emerged at the end of the financial year with an underspend. So I think it's important to note that these things can fluctuate. There are pressures that we can see emerging, particularly around housing needs, but all the same, despite I think a lot of the pressure that exists, many of our service areas are broadly on budget. So things like family and children's services, adult social care, they're broadly on track. Now, as we go into the winter, there could be winter pressures that throw it off track. So we can't be complacent about that. But I think it's worth bearing in mind as we reflect on the first quarter figures.
Thank you. Should we start with Tom?
Yeah. Thank you. I have a couple of questions, but I won't draw them and take too long. If we have time at the end, maybe circle back. But the first one is on parking. So I note 2 million reduced income from PCNs of 2 million due to the impact of the industrial dispute. That just seemed very high. So I was wondering if there's anything else that goes into that. And then sort of obviously parking being a important revenue generating area, and the sort of general trend towards lower revenue coming from that. And then we talk about producing an in-depth analysis. So the question on that is sort of what ideas are there, such as, are you considering selling additional permits, for example, which are very valuable, and could you bring, when those ideas in better form, could you bring them to the Environment Scrutiny Committee?
Okay, I can start with that and thanks. The first question was about whether anything went into the overspend that's shown in parking. I don't really think there was. It was a particular issue. It had a major effect. It's true to say that we generate a lot of revenue from parking, but it's also important to say that we don't have these parking services to generate revenue. That's not the purpose of those services. The service is there to ensure that parking is well maintained and that we act appropriately in accordance with our duties. I think in terms of
just on that, sorry, because I know it is within parking and highways, as you say, it's not revenue generating for other purposes, but it is important for highway maintenance and everything that goes into that.
Yeah, it is. I think the picture and the early work that I think we've been doing around the second quarter, although that's not kind of concluded yet, shows that the picture is starting to move in the better direction, and that's because the industrial action is over. There was that single kind of primary trigger. It now doesn't exist,
and so we would expect a reversion to something more on trend over the next 3 quarters. In terms of the structural challenges around parking revenue, my experience of that portfolio was that we were seeing roughly 2% decline year on year in the residential permit numbers. You would intuitively think that would lead to a roughly similar reduction in parking revenue, although that could be offset by policy decisions like you described. So the diesel surcharge and the electric discounts that we introduced a couple of years ago, for example, have a role to play in that. You could alter the surcharge or discount to produce a different kind of net figure in terms of the revenue generated by parking in that way. I don't know exactly where the lead member for transport has got to in relation to parking policy. I'm confident that were he to introduce significant changes to bring them to scrutiny, that would be my expectation. And I'm sure that he's keeping all sorts of options like the ones you mentioned under review, but I don't anticipate immediate changes.
Yeah, I have a question on IT strategy, but maybe if no one else asks, maybe you can come back to me at the end.
You can wish. Greg.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 separate questions. So my first one, there's been I would say, a mini scandal reported nationally in the press about SIL and Section 106 monies being sat on by local authorities. So I've had a look at page 81, which seems to show that Chelsea does spend its Section 106, and there does seem to be a process to spend it. Perhaps you can take me through and give me an assurance that we have a proper process for using this resource. And of course, Section 106 is dealt with on page 81. Less comfortingly, page 82 is a little blank where it talks to spending SIL, not neighbourhood SIL, but the SIL. So perhaps you can take me through those
So table 13 in section 13 around section 106 gives you the details. So we do regular reviews because there are time restraints as well in section 106, so you have to spend the money within a certain period of time and very often within certain criteria as well, and that can be either location or specific items. So we do regularly review the amount of money we've got, how we're spending it, and what you can see in that table is towards the bottom we have an opening balance at the start of the year of £44 million. We've already identified £17 million, with a big chunk of that being in the New Homes Delivery programme that we will spend when we've allocated that money. So while there is still a balance remaining of around 18 million, we can see half of that's already been allocated, and we'll continue that review as we go through the year.
I find that, just to intervene now, I find that very comforting that you've spent half of it, but slightly worrying that there might be a time limit. So what happens if we lose the 18 million if it's not spent, or what happens?
Technically, you could be required to pay it back. The time limit's usually around 5 years, so it's quite a long period of time. I'm not aware of monies having been paid back since I've been here. Others might know.
I'm not aware of significant amounts of money is being returned because we're not spending them in a timely way.
So very much I've got the assurance I need on 106, so SIL.
Yeah, then turning over the page, so you can see in 13.5 the opening balance, 35 million. We're still working through SIL and neighbours where we're allocating our money, but we do spend it on neighbourhood SIL, which is local area
Yes,
SIL.
neighbourhood SIL is a problem. I'm more worried about the other 85%.
So we are doing the work on that, and there will definitely be allocations, and that will be in the quarterly management report. I can assure you there will be some spend.
Thank you, Lisa. So my second question, and it might be me being thick here, debt interest. Now, where does this appear in the tables? I've got something on page 63, which is Treasury. It's called Treasury interest. That looks like, if I'm being stupid, looks like income is less than it should be rather than expenditure.
Yes, so
maybe that's not the right place.
table one, I don't have page numbers on mine. document that I printed off of the website.
So table one, I've got table one, it's the bottom of page 59.
Okay, so table one,
Yeah.
if you turn over the page,
Yeah.
Treasury interest. So that's both interest earned, so interest receivable and interest payable. So that would be picking up both interest we've had to pay with the levels of debt and also interest we've earned on monies that we have. So it's a
I
net
see.
return.
Okay, so that's why I was confused, because it's a double figure. So we've got, overall, we are getting income from interest, we're just getting a lot less than we expected.
That's right, so we budgeted for 2.9 million, we revised that slightly to 1.8, we're down at the moment on what we think we will achieve, and we obviously keep a close eye on that, but there's two sides to it, so we don't want to borrow money too early, so we don't pay interest when we don't need to, and also we do have, because of the result of that, means we have less cash balances to be earning interest on as well, so that's why they're shown together.
Personally, I find that quite confusing, I would quite like to see it spread out into two, but that might be difficult. But does the question for the lead member then is, with the interest rates being as high as they are, does that, and now not being a great time for borrowing, does that affect council's appetite for borrowing at the moment? Clearly we have to borrow something for some of the ambitious programmes we've got, but to what extent is our ambitions being trimmed because of the high cost of borrowing?
Well, if I take the Treasury interest question first, I mean, it's true, and I should have said that was one of the primary causes of the overspending this quarter. But if you flip the pages that were last year, Treasury management overperformed, so it's part of the budget that tends to up or down a bit, and it can fluctuate. So I would expect that picture to evolve over the course of the financial year. In terms of our appetite for borrowing, I'm not aware of major projects that have recently been taken out of the programme because we don't feel that we can borrow at the current rates. Certainly, I think if we were considering new borrowing, it would be a factor. I mean, you would think about the phasing of a project, its deliverability over a period of time, and the present interest rate environment, and there's a judgment to be made. So yeah, certainly it's something we can cognizant of. I suppose if we were to review phasing of projects that are underway, the timing of borrowing would be a consideration. I think it would be irresponsible not to be aware of that, but it's one of a range of factors, I think.
Thank you. Lucy, did you have a question?
Yes, a quick one. Johnny actually did touch on it when he was speaking at the beginning, but just you see that social care is forecasting a break-even budget session Q1, and just the sort of understanding as we go into winter and trying to think of how we are given the last few years and how that could affect and it's just charge and social care. So how confident we are.
Well, I think we are seeing rising demand for adult social care services. It's one of the biggest departmental budgets. We've been aware of rising demand for a long time, so in previous years it's also been a pressure. Over the past few years we have broken even or have underspends in that area, which is encouraging, in the sense that it means that we're budgeting in the correct way. We're not creating a problem financially for ourselves. I think we are anticipating there to be some winter pressures, and hopefully we've built enough into the budget to accommodate for that. I mean, that's obviously the process we go through when we set the budgets. But I think you're right to flag the challenge. It's going to be really difficult. A lot of the money that goes into adult social care comes from one-off grants or from money that is given to us from third parties. Clearly, when they're one-off or they're given to us by third parties, there is uncertainty about whether the arrangements will continue. And so, as with most boroughs, probably all boroughs, we would be vulnerable to unexpected changes in terms of the kinds of grants that we get from various places.
Yeah. My second question is that I'm not going to ask it. I think you've asked it, then what you just said.
That's good.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question following on from Councillor Hammond. I was just a bit confused on the SIL section 106 numbers, because on table 15E, on page 86, the silk contributions that are forecast as zero. In the bottom, I'm a bit confused. If we're budgeting in the last table, we're not forecasting any net movement for silk, it's zero. And if you look at section 106, it's got 16,035,000, which I can't work out how that's come from the figures that are on page 81. So I'm just a bit confused by the non-correlation of those numbers. If you could just help me with that.
Yeah, happy to, Councillor. So if we look at table 13, which is section 106, what you can see right at the very bottom of that table is the 16,035, which is the net movement in section 106. So that's the opening balance less the 17 million detailed above, less the new section 106 agreement pending allocation at Q1, which gives you right at the very bottom of that table the 16,035, which is the 16,035 net movement figure you can see on table 15E.
My page 81, 17.
You could tell the page.
Yeah. And then still follows the same kind of approach. So we've got your still balances 35,880, which in section 13.5 says the opening balance was 35,880. And because we haven't yet allocated or done the work around what we're going to pay from steel, that's why there's a zero in that middle column on table 15.8.
Thank you.
Claire? Yes, thank you. I've got just two quick things to clarify on table 9, if that's okay, and then a quick one on table 15. So looking at the Grenfell recovery revenue forecast, at 9.2, where we're talking about underspends, it's a carried forward in reserves or reinvested, and I'm wondering what do we mean by that exactly, number one. And number two, where is the Grenfell assistance of Help to Buy reflected in this table?
So 9.1, Grenfell Recovery Programme is forecasting an underspend of 167,000.
Yes. And there have been underspends in previous years as well, so I'm just concerned where that's going. Who's deciding it?
Yeah, so we do have some Grenfell reserves as well. So if we underspend, we usually put it into reserve and carry it forward to the following year.
Wow. And is that what reinvested means?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Second question.
The second question on this table, just very quickly, the Grenfell assistance of right to buy, help to buy rather, is that reflected in this table as in recovery, or is that a separate item?
I believe that's a separate item, but we'll take that away when we check for
Okay,
you.
thank you very much. And then just looking at page 85, the new request for additional funding, section 15. Where we are talking about the budget stabilisation reserve, you may remember in the budget scrutiny working group last year, with some of the savings that were made, I inquired why the budget stabilisation reserve was not being used. And I was told the budget stabilisation reserve is specifically for very serious last resort situation to stabilise a budget. So have I understood it correctly that that is the circumstance pertaining to the bid programme, Maxilla CIC, Curve Legacy, ward blitzes, listening tool and bridge housing? Is that why we are asking for additional funding from the budget stabilisation reserve? Have I understood correctly?
We're looking at table 15C.
And B?
So, okay, so 15C.
Yeah.
All of those items are actually coming from other reserves. So we've got bridge housing, special projects reserve, or contingency budget. It's not coming from the budget stabilisation reserve.
Right,
What it seems is coming from the council plan implementation reserve again.
okay, different reserves.
Yeah, and listing tools the same, it's special projects, so it's not actually from the budget stabilisation
Right.
reserve. And then, did you say 15B as well? That's the same
Well, yes,
situation.
at 15.5, the leadership team is asked to approve the transfer of 11 million from the budget stabilisation reserve to the special projects reserve, fund the implementation of Oracle.
That's horrible,
Yeah.
that's something different.
So is that also an extreme need?
Yes, so that's the new council's HR and finance system that we'll be implementing in October 2024. Previously, we would have implemented projects like that as a capital programme.
Yeah.
They've changed the rules around what you can capitalise. So
Yeah.
because this is now a system that is held in the cloud
Mhm.
and not actually a hardware system that you can physically touch, a tangible asset, you can no longer fund it from capital. So we are funding it from the budget stabilisation
Okay,
reserve.
that explains it. Thank you
So
very
that is a
much.
special item.
Well,
Thank you. This is the third quarter since the formation of the current budget. What are the strategic issues that are not the third quarter of this budget year? It's the third quarter since the budget was formed. What are the strategic issues emerging that will inform the work starting now, both on the 24-25 budget and also the update to the medium-term budget? I understand that sort of work is beginning to happen now. And therefore, what are the lessons to be learned? I'll mention two, and then I won't mention the IT area. I think it's talked about. Temporary accommodation is one. Carbon zero is interesting because it's not, doesn't appear to be mentioned in this report. The £100 million, or £150 million being put into the shortfall that we identified with that working group last year. Interestingly enough, neither the need for that, the shortfall that's mentioned, nor the recent movement on key decisions which are asking for approval of grants which are coming up with as well. And these are very big sums. In the last quarter, I think it's £22 million is coming in as a heading. So this leads me to my final question is, it's not tabled in papers today, but please give your response to progress with budget working through recommendations which are fully accepted by the leadership team and by full council.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, I'm happy to give a response to the recommendations that were made.
It's not, you won't give the code that way today.
No, but I can take that away. I'm working on that. I think the recommendations in terms of I'm confident that we are in a position to address them. I think
So it's lessons learned about now, about what's
I think that you've already alighted on probably the biggest emergent pressure since that period, which is TA. That's a major problem. It's one that doesn't appear likely to get better soon. So we will need to alter our plans in relation to how we deal with that, both in financial and in moral human terms. The numbers are rising and there are more people suffering than before. So I think that in kind of economic, that is the single biggest pressure to the general fund budget, and it's a movement that has occurred in those 3 quarters as well. So I think that's quite a direct answer to it. I mean, in terms of lessons learned and things that we might be thinking about going forward, there could be things that branch off from discussions we would have had last year, so ways of working, transformation, how we can do things differently, looking at the pressures that are coming up. So we talked about demand-led services, that's rising for us, particularly in the social care departments. I think those are the key areas that we need to look at. There are going to be some pretty tough savings over the medium term. The medium-term promotion fund we brought in the summer showed £40 million worth of savings over the next 4 years. Although the budget in 24-25 is posting a pretty modest gap in relative terms, The year after is much more challenging, which, as we talked about before, means that I think the approach to savings has to be a bit different. I think it's harder to resolve that through kind of salami slicing. So it'd be better, and that's recommending ways of working, transformation of services, maybe digitization. Obviously, with AI newly in my portfolio, that's another tool in my arsenal. Although we will have to be very careful about how we use it, and I'm not making a specific commitment about its application tonight. So I think that covers most of what you've been talking about.
Sorry, there's one further thing that you haven't answered. Like, can you explain to me why, or where I didn't find it, if I didn't really get where the greening, the £100 million spend, and where the money's coming from neither side of it as it's presented.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we can get you that. I think this report reflects what we've spent in quarter one. In quarter one, the commitments that we've made around greening have been covered by the expenditure in environment and communities and the capital programme and under 7
It's included in within other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the in-year financial monitoring. Some of the things you're talking about, Councillor, are future years, so they would not feature in-year.
Tom, you have a final question?
Yeah, so it's about 7.10 talks about the 4.8 million slippage in the customer access strategy IT components. What extent, because we had the CREST strategy, IT strategy, come to the ESC a couple of meetings ago. So I was just wondering, to what extent does this overlap with that? Question one. And then secondly, has there been an appraisal of the impact that slippage has on potential savings or costs across the organisation? Because I know I assume the strategy is in part to improve services, but also probably to make savings as well. So, yeah, does that slippage have an knock-on effect? Has that?
Yeah, so I think the customer access strategy doesn't really relate to CREST. I can see why it might appear that it would, but it's primarily to deal with things like the CRM, the customer relationship management portal that we're working on, and the single face in terms of how one would interact with the council. I think the potential with that is really transformative. It would be a way that you can perform a wide range of functions through a single portal. Whereas at the moment, to do that wide range of functions, you have to contact a wide range of phone numbers and email addresses and things. So there would be a saving arising from that. Certainly where there is slippage, yeah, I think that would be factored into how we think we're performing, because obviously we make savings, we agree savings when we set the budget. If they're reliant on investment that hasn't arisen, then we wouldn't realise the saving, and that contributes to the outturn position.
So just to follow up on that, the slippage, it's not a deliberate slippage to not have to spend so much money.
No, I think that one isn't.
Yeah.
I'd like to say that it was all about a cunning plan, but
Well, no, I would rather it not be a deliberate slippage.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If I just sort of draw together a few of the sort of comments that we've made and thoughts we've had. So we've talked about potential extra parking income, talked about the Section 106 and civil processes and how perhaps in the next report we'd like to know a bit more about those and have a bit more for the next month's report. Greg suggested that perhaps we separate out the treasury interest in the report into not have a net figure but an in and out if that's possible. Might aid clarity, might make the report more understandable to everyone. We talked about, Lucy's raised the issue of winter pressures. We might look as if we're ticking along nicely, but we're ticking along nicely before there's normally a big pressure. Claire asked a question about the specific parental right to buy issue, which I know you're going to come back on. Will asked about progress on the budget working group recommendations, and very kindly said you give us a report on that, or just something to circulate. It doesn't need to come to committee, but it could be circulated, which would be great. And I think we've all Will brought it out, but it was going to be my question as well, and that is there wasn't a question really, it's just an observation which I think we've all had about the temporary accommodation pressure. And you know, that's either going to, we either have to find a way to tackle it, or it's going to mean cuts elsewhere eventually. And that we're all very, you know, just to share our concern, which I'm sure you don't need us to share with you, but we ought to note it in this meeting.
Problem shared is a problem hard.
Or don't. But anyway, thank you very much, all three of you, for coming and answering a barrage of assorted questions. Claire?
On page 57, we are asked to agree a couple of things.
Excuse me, this report's going to leadership.
Okay, so it's not
For
us.
them to agree, so you'll see
Okay.
that.
Thanks for
Sorry,
keeping
Chair.
tabs on me, Claire. I like to know that I'm being kept tabs on, that's good, it's very reassuring. Thank you very much indeed. We will now move on to examining our own labels and the report of the scrutiny manager.
Thank you.
And here we're looking at the board plan and identifying any key decisions that we ought to spend a bit more time on. So I don't have the most efficient way of doing this is, has anyone got any in this list that they would like to?
There's two points I want to bring up here.
Perhaps if I do them by team, so on the leadership team.
Could I make a general point
Yeah.
first? Is that I think that we ought to note that it's fairly radically out of date,
Yes,
and that we need to get this up to date, useful document for us to.
there are still some new things on here. We talked about.
Are you talking about the decision due date?
Yeah. But the whole system is not sufficiently up to date, not addressed it in real time.
I've spoken to colleagues in governance. The decision due date, as you know, we have to give 28 days notice before a decision can be taken. So when the decision was first put on the forward plan, remembering that we asked colleagues to give as much notice as possible, that generates the decision due date, which is why the rules in
So in fact, it's quite a misleading date to even have on here. Do you think we just ditch that colour?
Presumably,
Yeah.
lead members and senior officers would know what a relevant date is, and that would be useful.
Good night, thank you.
Yeah, I'll take that feedback.
Well, we'll either ditch it or whatever. Let's have a look at it next time.
Yeah.
So, on the leadership team decisions, does anyone have anything that they'd like to deserves any greater attention? So we've got the shareholder subcommittee, which is about nominating directors, and then adult social care, page 1, 2, 3, and onwards. Any there that anyone feels needs looking at? That's nice. And family and children's services. Rental, housing and social investment.
Well, I think one thing that's worth saying about that is I believe those portfolios have been changed now. Not just the personalities, but the actual structure of the portfolios.
Yeah,
have been changed.
this would have been generated before
Yes.
those changes.
That feeds into my point about it being out of date.
So, can I say something on
Yes.
that, just so that I've understood correctly? We have Bramley House window replacements and external works. We have Treadgold House, for instance. Now, I'm not understanding how this is a forward plan, given that these are done deals.
So yes, this is
That's what I'm
more
not
relevant than the date. These are ones that we think have actually been taken.
So you
These
think
schemes.
Bramley House work has started? I know it has. Yeah, okay. I will go back to colleagues about that.
So those
Treadgold
ones-
House is a building site. So
Okay, so those should definitely come on.
Yeah, and also at the same time, I'm receiving emails about forthcoming key decisions to be added to the forward plan. So given the amount, or the number rather, of decisions which seem to be post hoc in our forward plan, what are the things that really are forward planning that scrutiny should be able to see in
Well, let's
advance?
assume that those two are an aberration, and that everything else should be here, but that Jackie's going
I
to
will,
have a
I
look.
will talk to colleagues in housing and I will get you an answer and circulate that to the committee.
I find this a very hard table to follow compared to the previous format.
Yeah.
Just to add to the points, perhaps on page 132, which is still in housing, just an example, smoke detection, fire alarm, and preventative maintenance. It's notes overview and scrutiny. I mean, I'm not sure if that is actually something for this committee, but all of it.
It's all overview and scrutiny receives this report, and then as a committee, usually the chair will decide which committee would scrutinise the KD. So that would be housing and communities, and that fire. You have a number of KDs relating to fire prevention. So
isn't that the case? Isn't that the scrutiny process that actually technically everything comes to overview and scrutiny and then it's delegated? So So pointless putting over the scrutiny in the notes unless it's actually going to be this committee that does it.
Okay.
That would be my observation.
Yeah, I think that's quite correct. Yeah.
I think further on 137 and 140 on decarbonisation fund, £7 million in one, and £15 million, £16 million in the other, is proposal to accept money funding from the government. That's £22 million and £43 million in total. And if those decisions have been made, which I believe one of them has and one is pending, we ought to have some sense of it coming in, because it didn't appear to be in the financial report. I'm still going to ask a question offline about that. Big money and overcomes a major policy risk, which is already on the audit transparency risk register as well. It's the lack of funds in the HRA to pay for carbon zero. In light of the sort of current politics around carbon zero, I think it's very important that we recognise that good work is being done. This is where the great success in bringing the money in against the primary policy of the council. So we're going to scrutinise this in the effective form. It's got to be fit for purpose, which I don't feel elusive.
Moving on, anything else? Anything in that we want to pick up, or should we want to planning, facing the environment? Anything there, Tom?
No.
No. Okay, thank you very much. Communities, other communities want to get that thing done. And the scrutiny work programme. Just to note that. Oh no, do we need to do 5?
On 3.3 and 3.4, there's a report. You went to the meeting. Is there anything you want to say, or is it a report to come in the future? I don't get a sense of where.
Sorry, where did it say report? You didn't have
3.4. Over the scrutiny question will be captioned form of progress, which is scrutiny.
Much report.
It's not a report. The beds at some of the beds at the Gordon Hospital were closed temporarily in 2020. The Adult Social Care and Health Select Committee has been scrutinising that and have made recommendations to CMWL. The Integrated Care Board is looking at the proposals, and there will be a consultation proposal on what will happen to the beds in the future, and those local authorities who are most affected will be notified about that proposal, and we will be one of the local authorities who are most affected.
Yes, so we haven't had
official
proposal advice yet, but we are clearly one of the boroughs most closely affected.
The mechanism you're saying is it goes to the Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee, and then it comes as a report to this committee.
No, what I'm saying, sorry, I wasn't clear. This committee has a responsibility to make sure that statutory scrutiny is carried out, either by this committee or by another committee. If there is a substantial variation of service, that will be statutory health scrutiny. So this committee would need to be aware of it. If it's done by a borough committee, it would be done by Adult